Michael Donovan had lived in Oakwood Estates for 15 years, settling into the suburban neighborhood after leaving behind his cramped city apartment. His single-story ranch home wasn't the largest on the block, but what it lacked in square footage, it made up for with its crown jewel, a 150-year-old heritage oak tree that stood majestically in his backyard, its sprawling canopy visible from 3 streets over. The ancient oak had been the deciding factor when Michael purchased the property. While other homes in the development offered newer appliances or recently updated kitchens, none could compete with the natural grandeur of this living monument. Its massive trunk measured nearly 6 feet in diameter with a textured bark that told stories of decades past. During autumn, its leaves transformed into a brilliant tapestry of amber and gold that neighborhood children would play beneath, collecting acorns and building memories. Last spring, concerned about some dead branches after a particularly harsh winter, Michael had hired Elliot Frazier, a certified arborist with 30 years of experience. Elliot had spent an entire afternoon examining the tree, climbing through its sturdy branches and testing its structural integrity. "You've got something special here, Michael," Elliot had said, running his weathered hand along the trunk. "Based on its age, size, historical significance, and the fact that it's one of the last pre-development trees in this county, I'd value it at approximately $200,000. They literally don't make them like this anymore." Michael had been stunned by the figure, but understood it immediately. The oak wasn't just a tree. It was a living piece of history that predated the Civil War. Its branches had witnessed the transformation of farmland into suburbs, standing firm through countless storms and seasonal changes. The tree served practical purposes beyond its beauty and historical value. During sweltering summer months, its dense canopy provided natural air conditioning for Michael's home and yard, reducing his energy bills by nearly 30% compared to his neighbors. The shade it cast allowed for a lush garden that would otherwise wilt under the direct sun, and the root system naturally managed water runoff during heavy rains. But perhaps most meaningful was the tree house that Michael had built among its branches for his daughter Emma when she was 8 years old. Now a college sophomore studying environmental science, Emma had spent countless hours in that wooden sanctuary, reading books, doing homework, and later sharing secrets with friends during teenage sleepovers. The treehouse remained despite Emma's absence at university, maintained by Michael as both a reminder of those precious years and an anticipation of her visits home. The oak had become part of the Donovan family identity. Neighbors used it as a landmark when giving directions. Turn left at the big oak tree, and the annual neighborhood block party traditionally ended beneath its branches with acoustic guitar playing and stargazing. Even the original developer had acknowledged its significance, designing the street curves specifically to preserve it, a fact noted in the original community planning documents that Michael kept filed away. Michael tended to the oak with religious devotion, seasonal fertilizing, careful pruning under Elliot's guidance, and regular checks for pests or disease. He understood the responsibility that came with being the oak's caretaker, not its owner. Some mornings he would sit beneath it with his coffee, watching sunlight filter through the leaves and feeling a sense of peace that no human-made structure could provide. The tree represented everything Michael valued: permanence, natural beauty, and connection to something greater than himself. What he couldn't possibly know was that this beloved oak would soon become the center of a neighborhood war that would test his patience, drain his bank account, and ultimately reveal the true character of everyone involved. When Deborah Winston moved in across the street 6 months ago, the neighborhood noticed immediately. Unlike the typical moving trucks and family sedans that usually heralded new residents, Deborah arrived in a procession of 3 luxury vehicles, the gleaming white Range Rover Autobiography leading the way, followed by a Mercedes G-Wagon and a BMW X7 driven by what appeared to be personal assistants. The moving company she hired wasn't the local outfit most residents used, but an exclusive white-glove service whose uniformed employees wore earpieces and spoke in hushed tones. Deborah herself emerged from the Range Rover in a cream-colored street John knit suit and Louboutin heels that sank slightly into the front lawn as she surveyed her new property with a critical eye. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that accentuated her angular features and the obvious results of recent cosmetic procedures. Michael, who had been mowing his lawn, offered a neighborly wave that Deborah acknowledged with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "That's quite the tree you have there," she called out, her voice carrying a practiced melodic quality that seemed designed to mask the hint of disdain underneath. "I hope it doesn't drop too many leaves on my new driveway." Within 2 weeks of establishing residence in the former Thompson house, which she had immediately begun renovating, ripping out what she loudly proclaimed was tragically outdated flooring, Deborah had not only joined the HOA board, but had somehow maneuvered herself into the president's position. The previous president, Tom Jenkins, a retired high school principal who had served for 8 years, suddenly found himself voted out during a sparsely attended emergency meeting called with minimum required notice. She's efficient, I'll give her that, Tom had told Michael over beers in his garage workshop. Showed up with color-coded binders full of community improvement initiatives and somehow convinced half the board that I was letting the neighborhood go to seed. He'd shaken his head in disbelief. 20 years living here, and suddenly I'm the neighborhood villain. Deborah wasted no time implementing her vision for Oakwood Estates. The community newsletter, formerly a quarterly publication featuring gardening tips and announcements of new babies, became a monthly catalog of violations and new regulations. The font size listing infraction fines increased, while the community events calendar shrank to make room for beautification standards that seemed suspiciously aligned with Deborah's personal aesthetic preferences. Her designer suits, always in neutral tones of cream, camel, or pale gray, became a harbinger of stress for many homeowners. The sight of Deborah Winston striding purposefully down a driveway, tablet in hand and measuring tape dangling from a manicured finger, could ruin anyone's weekend plans. She documented everything. Mailboxes that didn't match her newly approved design, trash cans visible from the street 5 minutes past collection day, and especially landscaping that didn't conform to her vision of tasteful uniformity. At her first official meeting as board president, held in the community clubhouse on a Wednesday evening, when many residents had other commitments, Deborah proposed a complete overhaul of the landscaping regulations. Michael, sensing trouble, had rearranged his work schedule to attend. He sat quietly in the back row, watching as Deborah presented a PowerPoint featuring before and after images of neighborhoods transformed from what she called haphazard individualism to cohesive community aesthetics. Property values are directly tied to visual consistency, she explained, clicking through slides of cookie-cutter front yards featuring the same boxwood hedges and hydrangea. Michael received 3 violation notices in 1 month, all signed by Deborah with her newly commissioned HOA president's seal, a gaudy gold foil emblem that hadn't existed until her tenure. Each notice arrived in a crisp white envelope with official HOA communication. Immediate AT&T required printed in bold red letters across the front. The first notice appeared on a Monday morning, tucked under his windshield wiper, although his mailbox was merely steps away. It claimed his mailbox was 2 inches taller than the newly approved standard, a standard that had been voted on during a supplementary session Michael had never been notified about. The letter informed him he had 7 calendar days to replace the offending mailbox with an approved model, conveniently available through Deborah's brother-in-law's hardware store at a special HOA member price that was 30% above retail, or face a $50 fine, which would double weekly. Michael measured his mailbox. It was exactly the height of every other mailbox on the street, the same model installed by the developer 15 years earlier. He took photos, documented the measurements, and drafted a polite response requesting the specific bylaw reference. 2 days later, he found Deborah herself measuring his mailbox with a professional-grade laser measurement tool. "Just confirming," she said without looking at him. "Our records need to be precise." She tapped something into her tablet and walked away without further comment. The second violation notice arrived by certified mail the following week. This one cited excessive natural debris from his oak tree and included close-up photographs of leaves in his garden beds and acorns on his walkway. Photos clearly taken while stepping onto his property without permission. The fine was $150, with a requirement to remove all natural debris within 48 hours, regardless of weather conditions. Michael noticed the date on the photos was from the morning after a significant windstorm that had affected the entire county. "This is getting ridiculous," Michael muttered as he called Tom Jenkins, a former HOA president. Tom sighed heavily on the phone. "She's doing the same to the Richardsons because of their magnolia tree, and the Pavels got hit for their vegetable garden being visible from the street. She's systematically targeting anyone with landscaping that doesn't fit her aesthetic." The third violation notice was hand-delivered by Deborah herself on a Sunday morning. Michael opened his door to find her standing there in tennis whites, although Michael had never seen her use the community courts. "This is just a courtesy," she said, her smile tight and practiced. "I wanted to personally explain the seriousness of this situation." The notice demanded he trim his oak tree because it encroached on community sightlines and created aesthetic inconsistency with neighborhood standards. It further claimed the tree's root system was potentially compromising community infrastructure. The fine was $500, with a warning that failure to address the violation would result in remedial action taken by the association at the homeowner's expense. Alarmed, Michael immediately called Elliot Frazier, the arborist who had previously valued the tree. Elliot arrived the next morning, conducting another thorough examination of the oak. His professional assessment was unequivocal. "This tree is in excellent health," he confirmed, handing Michael a detailed report. "The root system is stable and poses no threat to surrounding structures. The canopy does extend over the sidewalk, but well above the minimum clearance requirements for pedestrian pathways. Trimming beyond basic maintenance would stress the tree and potentially create actual hazards. Whoever wrote this notice either doesn't understand tree care or is intentionally misrepresenting the situation. Tuesday began like any other workday for Michael. He'd arranged to leave his office early to attend the unauthorized HOA meeting, but a client emergency erupted at 11 a.m., involving contract revisions that required his immediate attention. By the time he finished the urgent work, his watch read 1:47 p.m. The meeting would be nearly over, but he might still catch the end of it. He called the community clubhouse as he rushed to his car, but no one answered. Strange, he thought, since HOA meetings were typically held there. Perhaps they'd moved to another location? He tried Tom Jenkins again, but got his voicemail. Unease settled in Michael's stomach as he pulled out of the office parking garage. As he turned onto Oakwood Drive, the entrance to his subdivision, something seemed off. There was more traffic than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. 2 blocks from his house, he spotted the first vehicle, a large commercial truck with Precision Tree Services emblazoned on its side, parked at an angle that partially blocked the road. His unease blossomed into full-blown anxiety. Rounding the final corner to his street, Michael's worst fears materialized before his eyes. 2 more tree service trucks were parked in front of his house, their hazard lights flashing. The sound of chainsaws filled the air. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, some recording with their phones, others watching in silence. Michael slammed on his brakes and abandoned his car half on the curb, ignoring a neighbor's shout as he sprinted toward his property. What he saw stopped him cold. 3 workers in bright yellow safety vests were perched in cherry pickers raised to the height of his oak's primary branches. 2 were actively cutting through massive limbs with chainsaws, while another used a pole saw to remove smaller branches. The 4th worker dragged severed branches to a wood chipper that roared like an angry beast, consuming the oak piece by piece. "Stop!" Michael screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Stop right now." 1 worker glanced down, saw Michael's distress, and signaled to his colleagues. The chainsaws fell silent one by one, but not before another massive branch was cut and fell to the ground with a sickening thud that Michael felt in his chest. As the workers began lowering their cherry pickers, Michael spotted Deborah Winston standing on the sidewalk in front of his house. Unlike the casual tennis outfit from Sunday, today she wore a charcoal gray pantsuit and black pumps, her hair perfectly coiffed, looking more like she was heading to a corporate boardroom than supervising tree removal. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and she wore large sunglasses despite the overcast day. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Michael demanded, striding toward her, hands shaking with rage and shock. Deborah removed her sunglasses with deliberate slowness, revealing eyes cold with satisfaction. "Enforcing HOA regulations," she replied, her voice carrying just enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "We voted on this at the emergency board meeting earlier. You weren't there, so we proceeded with neighborhood improvement as authorized by the board." "You've had no right." Michael's voice rose. "That tree is on my property. You can't just—" "Actually, we can," Deborah interrupted, producing a folder from her designer tote bag. Article VII, Section 12 of the revised bylaws gives the HOA authority to remedy violations that impact community aesthetics and safety. The board voted unanimously. "Revised bylaws," Michael sputtered. "Those haven't been approved by the full membership, and that tree isn't a violation of anything." He turned to the tree service foreman who had approached, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "This is my property. You need to stop now." The foreman, a stocky man with a weathered face and clear eyes, frowned. "Ma'am," he addressed Deborah, "you told us this was HOA common property and showed us authorization papers." "It is an HOA matter," Deborah insisted. "I have all the documentation right here." "No, you don't," Michael countered, pulling out his phone. He quickly accessed his property survey PDF, zooming in to show the foreman. "This tree is fully within my property lines. She has no authority to remove it." The foreman examined the survey, then compared it to the work order in his hand. "This doesn't match what we were told," he said, slowly looking up at Deborah with narrowing eyes. "The work order says this tree is on common property and posing an immediate hazard requiring emergency removal." The tree service foreman, whose name tag read Bill, pulled Michael aside while his crew remained frozen in place, uncertain whether to continue or pack up. The man's weathered face showed genuine concern mixed with professional embarrassment. "I've been doing this for 27 years, Bill explained apologetically, running a calloused hand through salt and pepper hair. "We never touch a tree without proper authorization." She showed us HOA letterhead with board signatures approving removal of a hazardous tree on community property. He pointed to the work order bearing Deborah's signature as HOA president, alongside what appeared to be signatures from other board members. Michael scanned the document, recognizing Tom Jenkins' signature, which was impossible since Tom had specifically told him he couldn't attend today's meeting. Next to it was Barbara Chen's signature, but Barbara was currently on a Mediterranean cruise. Michael had received a postcard from Santorini just yesterday. These signatures are forged, Michael said quietly, the realization sinking in. And the property line isn't even close to where she claimed. Bill's face darkened. That's fraud, sir. We're insured for accidents, not criminal activity. He reached for his radio to call off the remaining workers when a sound interrupted him, a sound that would haunt Michael's dreams for months to come. It began as a subtle creaking, barely audible, over the idling engines of the tree service trucks. Then came a sharp, splintering crack that seemed to echo across the entire neighborhood. Every head turned toward the ancient oak. "Clear the area," Bill shouted, his trained eye immediately recognizing what was happening. "Everybody back. Now." The workers scrambled down from their partially lowered cherry pickers. Neighbors scattered from the sidewalk, parents grabbing children and pulling them to safety. Michael stood frozen, unable to process what was happening to his beloved tree. Bill grabbed Michael's arm and physically yanked him backward just as another tremendous crack split the air. The oak, with nearly half its supportive branches removed and its weight distribution fatally compromised, had begun to fail catastrophically. The massive trunk, which had stood firm through countless storms over 150 years, was now twisting under its own weight, the exposed heartwood splintering in jagged lines. "She did this on purpose," Michael whispered, the horror of understanding washing over him as he watched Deborah standing at a calculated distance, close enough to witness but far enough to avoid danger. Her expression was unreadable behind her sunglasses, but her posture radiated satisfaction. With a final thunderous groan that seemed almost alive with pain, the ancient oak surrendered to gravity. The direction of its fall was inevitable. Physics made sure of that. Without its counterbalancing limbs, the tree could only topple toward the street, directly where Deborah's gleaming white Range Rover sat parked. Time seemed to slow as the massive trunk descended. A few neighbors gasped. Someone was recording the entire scene on their phone. The collapse happened with both terrible swiftness and dreamlike slowness, the way all life-changing moments seem to occur. The impact, when it came, was seismic. The Range Rover's security system wailed briefly before being silenced by the crushing weight of wood that was older than anyone present. The luxury vehicle's roof collapsed instantly, windows exploding outward in a shower of safety glass. The oak's upper branches scraped against the pavement, leaves shuddering one final time before going still. A stunned silence fell over the scene, broken only by the distant sound of a child crying somewhere down the street. For several heartbeats, no one moved or spoke. Then came Deborah's scream, a sound so theatrical and precisely timed that it might have been rehearsed. She rushed toward her destroyed vehicle, her designer heels clicking rapidly on the pavement, phone already in hand. "My car. My $60,000 car. Look what your tree did," she shrieked, pointing accusingly at Michael while dialing with her other hand. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling my insurance. I'm calling my lawyer." Bill the foreman exchanged a look with Michael that communicated volumes. The tree service crew stood awkwardly by their equipment, witnesses to what was clearly a staged disaster. "Ma'am," Bill said, stepping forward with professional calm, "I need to inform you that my company will be filing an incident report detailing exactly how this tree came to fall, including the fact that it was structurally sound before unauthorized cutting began under false pretenses." Deborah's head snapped toward him, her performance momentarily interrupted. "You were hired to do a job," she hissed. "A job you clearly botched." "A job we were tricked into doing," Bill corrected firmly, "with forged documentation, as it turns out." 3 days after the oak's destruction, Michael was preparing breakfast when a sharp knock interrupted the quiet morning. Opening his front door, he found a thin man in an ill-fitting suit holding a manila envelope. "Michael Donovan?" the man asked without smiling. "Yes." "You've been served." The process server thrust the envelope into Michael's hands and hurried back to his car before Michael could respond. Inside the envelope, legal language spelled out the unthinkable. Deborah Winston was suing him for $75,000, the claimed value of her destroyed Range Rover, plus compensation for emotional distress and loss of use. The lawsuit alleged his dangerous and unmaintained tree had caused the damage, claiming it was structurally unsound and posed a known hazard that the defendant negligently ignored despite repeated warnings. Michael's coffee went cold as he read through the complaint, each paragraph more outrageous than the last. According to Deborah's filing, she had repeatedly expressed concern about the dangerous condition of the tree, and the defendant had refused to address the hazard despite HOA citations. The lawsuit made no mention of the unauthorized cutting. In Deborah's version, the tree had simply fallen during normal weather conditions due to its compromised structure. "This is insane," Michael muttered, reaching for his phone to call Tom Jenkins, who had practiced law before retirement. Tom's reaction was immediate and profane. "She's got some nerve," he growled after Michael explained the situation. "But I'm not entirely surprised. Let me make some calls. I know several people who practice this kind of law." That same afternoon, Michael learned from a neighbor that Deborah had also filed an insurance claim for her vehicle. According to Linda Patterson, whose daughter worked at the local State Farm office, Deborah had reported that the tree had fallen naturally during a wind event and had provided a detailed statement describing how she had just returned from the grocery store when, without warning, the diseased tree collapsed. There was no wind that day, Michael pointed out, and she was standing right there directing the tree service when it happened. Linda nodded knowingly. That's not what she told the insurance company. Jessica says Deborah submitted a claim for $82,500. Apparently, she had just installed some custom upgrades to the vehicle. The following day, Michael received a call from Deborah's insurance company. The adjuster, a methodical woman named Rhonda Mills, had questions about the incident. "Mr. Donovan, we're investigating a claim involving your tree damaging Ms. Winston's vehicle," she began. "Our initial report indicates the tree fell during calm weather, which suggests structural problems. Were you aware of any decay or damage to the tree prior to this incident?" "The tree was perfectly healthy until her crew started cutting it down without permission," Michael replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. He explained the entire situation, including the forged HOA documents and the arborist's recent assessment. There was a long pause on the line. "I see," Rhonda finally said. "Would you be willing to provide a formal statement? And do you have any documentation of the tree's condition before the incident?" "I have everything," Michael assured her. "The arborist report from just weeks ago, security camera footage from my doorbell showing Deborah directing the unauthorized removal, and multiple witnesses who saw exactly what happened." "Security footage?" Rhonda repeated, her professional tone momentarily slipping. "That would be extremely helpful to our investigation." Within hours of sending the video files to the insurance company, Michael received another call from Rhonda. Her voice had changed from neutral to coldly professional. "Mr. Donovan, I want to thank you for your cooperation. Based on the evidence you provided, we're denying Ms. Winston's claim due to material misrepresentation and potential insurance fraud. Our fraud investigation unit will be reviewing this case further." That evening, Michael met with Elaine Rodriguez, a property attorney Tom had recommended. After reviewing the case materials, her eyes gleamed with a particular light that lawyers get when they encounter a slam-dunk case. "This isn't just defensible," she explained, spreading documents across Michael's dining table. "This is a textbook case for a substantial countersuit. The fraudulent HOA documentation, the trespassing, the unauthorized destruction of a valuable asset on your property, the false insurance claim, and now this frivolous lawsuit." She shook her head in disbelief. "Ms. Winston has created a perfect legal storm against herself." Michael hesitated. "I'm not the litigious type. I just want to be made whole for my loss." 6 months passed between the filing of Michael's countersuit and the day they finally appeared in court. Those months transformed both Michael and the Oakwood Estates community in ways no one could have predicted. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed patterns of behavior that shocked even those who had been skeptical of Deborah from the beginning. Elaine Rodriguez, Michael's attorney, systematically dismantled Deborah's carefully constructed facade through documents, depositions, and digital evidence. Email records subpoenaed from Deborah's accounts showed she had never held the emergency board meeting she claimed authorized the tree removal. In fact, she had sent messages to several board members canceling a regularly scheduled meeting, then forged their signatures on the authorization document. Text messages recovered from her phone revealed conversations with a real estate developer friend discussing how the removal of that eyesore oak would improve sightlines for potential luxury condos on adjacent undeveloped land, property Deborah had quietly invested in 3 months before moving to Oakwood Estates. Most damning of all were the emails between Deborah and her insurance agent from 2 weeks before the incident, inquiring about her coverage limits for acts of God and whether her policy covered full replacement value plus compensation for inconvenience. She had also increased her coverage just 10 days before the tree fell. As these details emerged, the community's relationship with Deborah shifted dramatically. HOA board members, embarrassed by how easily they had been manipulated, called for her immediate removal. 3 separate homeowners filed their own suits for fraudulent fines and property violations. The tree service company, eager to protect their reputation, provided detailed testimony about how Deborah had misrepresented the situation. Through it all, Michael found unexpected strength. The man who had once avoided confrontation became a reluctant but determined advocate, not just for his beloved oak, but for community governance and accountability. Neighbors who had barely exchanged more than polite nods before the incident brought him casseroles, offered witness statements, and shared their own stories of intimidation. "It was never about the money," Michael explained to a local newspaper reporter who covered the story. "It was about someone thinking the rules didn't apply to them, that they could destroy something irreplaceable and face no consequences." When the court date finally arrived, Deborah appeared in an understated navy blue suit, her previous flashy style notably absent. Her attorney, a high-priced litigator from a prestigious downtown firm, looked increasingly uncomfortable as Judge Eleanor Simmons, known for her no-nonsense approach to property disputes, reviewed the case files. Your Honor, Deborah's attorney began. My client admits to a regrettable misunderstanding regarding HOA protocols, but maintains the tree posed a legitimate safety concern and... Judge Simmons interrupted, peering over her reading glasses. Counselor, I've reviewed the evidence thoroughly. This goes well beyond a misunderstanding. Your client forged official documents, trespassed on private property, destroyed a valuable asset, filed a fraudulent insurance claim, and then had the audacity to sue the victim of her actions. In 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such a clear pattern of deliberate misconduct. The trial itself was surprisingly brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a visibly unsympathetic judge, Deborah's attorney advised her to settle. She refused, apparently convinced her wealth and status would ultimately protect her. It was a miscalculation that proved costly. Judge Simmons' ruling was decisive. Michael was awarded the full $200,000 value of the tree, plus $50,000 for property damage and restoration, $25,000 for emotional distress, and all legal fees. Additionally, the judge imposed $100,000 in punitive damages, citing Deborah's extraordinary bad faith and malicious intent. But the most satisfying part of the judgment for Michael and many in the community wasn't monetary. Judge Simmons included 3 additional provisions. First, Deborah was removed from the HOA board and prohibited from serving on any homeowners association for 10 years. Second, she was ordered to attend an environmental stewardship course at the county extension office, 20 hours of community service learning about tree preservation and care. Finally, and most meaningfully to Michael, the judge ordered that a portion of the settlement, $50,000, be placed in a trust dedicated to planting new trees throughout Oakwood Estates. 10 oak saplings would be planted in public areas, each with a small plaque telling the story of the heritage oak that once stood on Michael's property.